I love Pulse. It's a masterclass in acting, writing, directing, and is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And it only took until 2006 for America to shit all over it. The American remake of Pulse. Truly a masterclass in dog shit. This remake is one of my most hated movies of all time. A movie that sends absolute shivers down my shit. But you know what's scarier than the remake of Pulse? The history of it. Historians theorize the remake of Pulse was just a simple one and done deal like most horror remakes, and nobody has heard from them since. But first, we have to talk about the original Pulse, or Cairo as it's called in Japan, because I have to get some sort of solace in this f***ing video. The original Pulse was a Japanese horror film made by Kiyoshi Kurosawa in 2001. The film followed two groups of people as they witnessed surreal happenings across the internet after a classmate commits suicide. More and more people start to disappear, and as the two groups converge onto each other, they realize the disappearances are tied to the internet and the paranormal. Basically, it's a ghost story, where the ghosts use the internet to invade the world of the living. I know how that sounds a little silly, seeing how movies like Unfriended exist.
This is probably a glitch.
Well, the glitch just typed.
But I assure you, nothing stupid happens like a ghost crawling out of a modem or anything. But that's exactly what happens in the American one. I'm also going to say this right off the bat, go watch the original Pulse. It's straight up one of the best horror movies ever made, and it's not hard to track down a way to watch it. I say this because I'm going to be comparing the American remake to the Japanese original throughout this video. So if you want to go into a great horror movie blind, just go watch it. I'll still be here losing my shit. Oh shit, I was talking about the history. Funny quirk about the American Pulse, it makes you want to talk about its superior version. But anyway, the original Pulse comes out in 2001, and it's good. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, where American remakes of Japanese movies are all the rage. I'm talking stuff like the Grudge remake and the Ring remake. And these movies did well. They made lots of money and even spawned their own sequels. The Pulse remake, on the other hand, it could barely make back its budget. But, like all tragedies, it begins with good intentions. Back in 2003, right in the middle of these American remakes, writer-director Wes Craven signed on to helm the remake to Pulse. Most horror fans will know Wes Craven as the creator of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, Scream, and of course, Dracula 2000. But for some reason, Craven was kicked off the project and placed onto the film Cursed, the werewolf movie from 2005. So the producers had to get a new writer and director to rewrite the script and lead the movie. So they got writer Ray Wright, whose credits are nothing, and director Jim Sonzero, whose other credits include literally nothing. This is odd because Wes Craven is still credited as a main writer for the film. This is a little strange because according to Craven in an interview for Fangoria, Wes stated, "I have had no influence on the film that is about to release." Can we also just acknowledge how odd it is to see Pulse in the mix with all these American horror remakes? Say what you will about the Grudge and the Ring remakes, but those movies made sense to exist. The original versions of those movies were pretty good, but they definitely had room for improvement, so a remake is totally not out of the question. Especially when the director of The Grudge came back to direct its American remake. So it's strange to see a movie as flawless as the original Pulse get a remake. The only kind of people who would do such a thing are the kind of people who value money over good ideas and are probably shit people in general. This is all starting to make sense now. Of course, we can't attribute all the problems of Pulse to these two people, which is why we have to dig deeper. In an interview with co-star Christina Mulan, she states director Jim Sonzero didn't want us to see the original. I also want to mention that in an interview with star Kristen Bell, she mentions how the crew was only fed peanuts and Dixie cups of coffee and she had to go out to buy them real food. What the fuck kind of Doug Walker production do they have going on there?
Robert.
You guys seriously have no idea how cursed this production is. I can only imagine how worse it was in the info we don't know. So I guess the only thing we can do now is talk about the movie. Okay, heads up, I'm going to refer to the original Pulse as Cairo from now on, and the American Pulse will be Pulse. So, Pulse pretty much has the same story as Cairo. A group of friends slowly realize the population is disappearing, and they find out it's linked to a Luigi's Mansion ROM from the internet, and they have to deal with it. The story on a surface level is a lot like Cairo, but it's in the execution of its ideas, story, and, well, everything else that makes it terrible. So let's just talk about it then. This movie automatically goes on my shit list because it misinterprets everything about the original. I like to imagine the producers went to the spark notes for Cairo and wrote down everything that showed up more than once and made sure they put it in the script so they could say they actually remade Cairo. What's this? There's red tape in the movie. Put it in the script. The internet's a thing. Don't forget to add that. There's dust in this movie. Okay, let's go. We got lunch in 5 minutes. We have to finish the movie by then. So, let's go down a list they might have made for themselves. Number 1, the characters. This movie automatically fails with its characters by having one of the biggest mistakes in most horror movies. The characters are the main focus, not the scary shit that happens. Too much of this movie is dedicated to these pricks and not enough time is focused on the actual threat. That is until the final 30 minutes where it basically becomes a funhouse. The characters in Cairo served as a vessel into the world, and they were characters that were portrayed as normal people caught in the ghost business. Pulse just shits all over that, but I'll get to that later. This would have been a tiny bit better if this movie had good actors, or at least actors who could pull some weight. Listen, I love Kirsten Bell, couldn't get enough of her in the hit Disney film Frozen, she was good in that. In that movie, she does a lot of emoting, and she acts like almost how a real person would. But in Pulse, she can't even pretend to be sad. Number 2, the atmosphere and pacing. One of my favorite things about Cairo is the atmosphere. It's one of those slow building dreadful atmospheres you get in movies like The Shining and The Thing. It's a movie that gets more bleak and inescapable as the movie goes on. You start to notice how empty the streets become in the wide shots. You realize how lonely a library or a classroom is, and you hear nothing in places like a convenience store that would normally have tons of people. And all of this is tied to the pace. This doesn't happen in the span of 10 minutes. Moments like this are sprinkled throughout the film, and it never directly pays attention to it. It's something that you, the audience, notices, and something the characters realize all too late. But how does Pulse crap the bed in this regard? They do it by breaking yet another rule: they tell and don't show. There are way too many scenes of characters just saying how empty the classrooms are, and the movie just keeps cutting back to the news report talking about the situation. This is anti-filmmaking at its best. Also, side note, why is this movie so blue? Did they film this in the middle of the Mediterranean or something? Because if I was underwater and a ghost was after me, the last thing I'm worried about is the ghost. And the pacing isn't much better either. Pulse is about 30 minutes shorter than Cairo, and a shorter movie isn't a bad thing. I prefer shorter movies. But the thing with Cairo is that it's very deliberate in how it spends its time. Cairo wanted to make you feel like you were in its world. It wanted you to take stock of every little location it had. And in turn, this would make you feel more involved with the character and start to notice when things get scary. But in Pulse, it's basically a haunted house attraction. It just wants to get to the end. Number 3, the ghosts. The f***ing ghosts in this movie look like Nosferatu. Pulse is a monster mash when compared to Cairo. In Cairo, you never really got a good look at the ghosts. They are either just not there and have a presence in the scene, or take a form that is human-like, but isn't quite right. But in Pulse, the ghosts are just creatures from the forest, but somehow not scary at all. There's an interview with director Jim Zanzaro, where he states that the key to a good monster is to not show it that much, so it won't lose its luster. If he thinks this, then why is the movie just a bunch of jump scares with the ghosts in full view? Number 4, the conflict. I know I said both movies deal with a ghost threat, but the way both movies handle it is night and day. And I'll give you 3 guesses to which one does it better. When Cairo starts, the ghost shenanigans are already happening on an implied massive scale. And that's what makes Cairo scary. By the time you and the characters figure out what's going on, it's already too late. It's always been too late. The conflict in Cairo is something that everyone in the movie is going through. Even the characters we only see for a couple of minutes. This isn't a problem that only happens to the main characters, even though it isn't related to them. In Pulse, the movie might as well take place on a stage because everything is centered on these characters, to the point where the main conflict is caused by the characters. Oh, by the way, spoilers for this movie you should never watch. Towards the end of the movie, it's revealed that the main character's boyfriend was responsible for opening the internet for the ghost to come through. And that ruins the entire point of Cairo. The ghost stuff isn't isolated to one group of people. And that really isn't technically the case for Pulse, but it might as well be. How come the characters just happen to have all the things they need to solve this Scooby-Doo mystery? It's all too convenient. Oh wow, the main character's boyfriend just happens to know the guy who can explain what's going on and how everything happened. Oh, and these guys just also happen to have the means to stop the ghost because there has to be some sort of conflict even though there's fucking ghosts. Number 5, the stuff from Cairo. Naturally, Pulse has to pull some things from the original Cairo so it can be, in fact, a remake. But the way they went about doing it made it feel like an amusement park attraction. Come on down everyone and see the Cairo remake. We have such sites as the red tape, the dust, and the internet. I'm going to focus on the red tape and the internet because I feel like they f***ed those ideas up the most. In Cairo, the red tape had no concrete meaning. It was just something that you notice slowly appear throughout the movie. It's implied in the movie that the red tape has some sort of connection to the ghost. It adds another layer of mystery to Cairo that is left up for the viewer to interpret on their own. But in Pulse, they just straight up say the tape stops the ghost. It removes so much of the intrigue and mystery that the movie just tells you. And then we have the internet. The internet plays a big role in both movies. But in Cairo, it's a lot more subtle in how it portrays the lowliness of the internet. Cairo came out in 2001, around the time the internet was starting to really take off. But despite this, the internet aspect of the movie is not heavy-handed at all, just like everything else in the movie. But the internet aspect in Pulse is the very first thing you see, and they make sure you never forget it. It's super annoying. Number 6, the scares, or lack thereof. Yeah, this is one of those jump scare movies. They try to have some unsettling imagery, but it just doesn't work, man. There is a part in the movie where it becomes a poster, and at first it looks pretty cool, but then the camera pulls away and it becomes a stupid face. This is on par with the Blood River skeleton in Fear. Instead of just leaving the horror at that, I'm going to break down one of my favorite scenes from Cairo and compare it to a similar bit in Pulse. In both movies, there's a part where a character goes into an apartment and comes across a ghost, and they seem similar at a glance. In the build-up for the scene in Cairo, the character walks into the apartment that we see is sealed with red tape. This is important because this is the first time we see the red tape and start establishing connections to it. In Pulse, the character does the same, minus the red tape. In Cairo, it is established that the room is very small and is very dark, because there are no windows, and the only thing in the room is a chair and red tape on the wall. Back in Pulseland, the character goes into a place we've been before, so we know what's here and it's also very well lit, so we can pretty much see everything. And then the ghost appears. In Cairo, the ghost appears in a dark corner of the room, a place the character stood in front of seconds earlier. But despite it being dark, we can see the figure from the knee down, but everything else is covered in shadow. There also isn't even any music cue when the ghost shows up. The character just turns around and she's there. In Pulse, the character is already looking into the camera, which is where the ghost appears, along with a music cue that gives away the scare before it even happens. The ghost in Cairo keeps the camera locked onto it as it slowly makes its way to the camera. At one point, the ghost seems to trip over, almost falling into the light, but we still can't get a good look at it. It gets back up and keeps walking towards the camera, only then cutting back to the character as he falls over and crawls behind the sofa where we can still see the ghost coming for him. In Pulse, the ghost walks towards our character, but the room is so well lit we can see her entire body. And instead of her continuously walking, she teleports after the dip. The scene isn't even one continuous take. It keeps cutting back and forth and removes all the tension. The scare in Cairo ends with the ghost slowly peeking over the sofa, while Pulse ends with, well, you guessed it, a jump scare. And now, I'm going to end this chapter with a sentence, because if this movie wants to be painfully predictable, then so can I. Can you tell I don't like this movie? The worst kind of remakes are the ones that disregard everything that made the original work. and even if they don't keep much, they don't add anything of value. I'm going to compare Pulse to another adaptation of something I like. But Cameron, the animated Lord of the Rings is a book adaptation. Yeah, I know, but I just sat through Pulse, so let me talk about something I actually like for once. It is generally agreed upon that the animated Lord of the Rings is flawed, but it is known that the people working on it had a deep respect for the original material and were firing on all cylinders to make this the best movie they could. The animated Lord of the Rings is still talked about to this day, and even though it has its problems, it's never about the transition of book to screen, it's mostly just stylistic choices. It's a movie that will still have respect and an audience for the rest of time. The American remake of Pulse, on the other hand, will be lucky to find someone to mercy kill it. By all means, avoid the remake to Pulse, watch the original. If this remake did anything, it made me appreciate the original even more. The American remake of Pulse is without a doubt my least favorite horror movie of all time. There is no other movie I would like less. God damn it.